exactly what you deserve! Get out of my house! You are too old!
My daughter, kindness does not cost anything.
An elderly maid carefully placed a breakfast tray on the dining table inside a luxurious mansion, when without warning, a beautiful young woman slapped her so hard that the tray crashed onto the floor. "You useless woman! Didn't I tell you breakfast must be ready by 8?" she shouted. The old woman held her burning cheek and whispered, "I'm sorry," but the apology only made the young woman angrier. What the young woman didn't know was that every second of her cruelty was being streamed live. Miles away, a billionaire froze as he watched the horrifying scene unfold on his phone. His face turned pale as he whispered, "My mother." He immediately abandoned everything and raced out of his office. Vera thought she had hidden her true character, but she had no idea that her future husband had just witnessed her cruelty with his own eyes. But how did a billionaire's mother end up working as a maid in her own son's house? To understand that heartbreaking journey, we have to go back 28 years. Anita had everything most people only dreamed about. At just 20 years old, she was the only child of Mr. Adam and Mrs. Eve, one of the wealthiest couples in the city. Their mansion stood on a quiet hill, surrounded by beautiful gardens, expensive cars, and tall gates that everyone recognized. Her father owned several successful companies, while her mother was known for her elegance and generosity. To them, Anita was not just a daughter, she was the center of their world. From the day she was born, they gave her the very best life money could buy. They traveled together during holidays, celebrated every birthday with grand parties, and never allowed her to feel unloved for even a single day. Whenever guests visited their home, Mr. Adam would smile proudly and say, "Everything I have worked for will one day belong to my daughter." Mrs. Eve would gently hold Anita's hand and add with a smile, "She is the greatest blessing God has ever given us." Anita was not spoiled, despite her privileged life. She was beautiful without being proud, intelligent without looking down on others, and kind to everyone regardless of their background. The workers in her parents' home loved her because she greeted every one of them by name. If she saw a gardener working under the hot afternoon sun, she would personally bring him a bottle of cold water. If one of the maids looked tired, she would ask, "Are you all right? Have you eaten today?" That was simply who Anita was. She was in her 3rd year at one of the country's finest universities, studying business administration. Everyone believed her future was already written. She would graduate with excellent grades, inherit part of her father's empire, and eventually marry someone from another wealthy family. At least, that was what everyone expected. But life had already written a different story for her. It was during her 2nd year at the university that Anita met Joe. Unlike the wealthy young men who constantly tried to impress her with expensive gifts and flashy cars, Joe had almost nothing. He came from a poor family and rented a tiny apartment close to the campus. He was handsome, funny, and had the kind of smile that made people feel comfortable around him. He had big dreams, but very little money. Their first meeting happened in the university library when Anita accidentally dropped several books on the floor. Before she could bend down to pick them up, Joe was already gathering them. "Looks like these books wanted to escape," he joked with a grin. Anita laughed. "Or maybe they're tired of me reading them." "Impossible," Joe replied. "Books like intelligent people." She smiled. "And how do you know I'm intelligent?" Joe shrugged playfully. "You came to the library willingly. That's enough evidence." They both laughed, and what began as a simple conversation slowly became a beautiful friendship. They studied together, ate lunch together, and spent long evenings talking about their dreams. Joe often spoke about building a successful life from nothing. "I wasn't born rich," he once told her as they sat under a large tree on campus, "but I don't intend to remain poor forever. One day I'll make something of myself." Anita looked at him with admiration. "I believe you." Joe smiled. "Really?" "Yes," she replied, "because you don't complain about your situation. You work hard." Their friendship slowly turned into love. Although Anita knew her parents would never approve of someone from Joe's background, she believed love was more important than money. Joe constantly assured her that everything would work out. After graduation, he would say, while holding her hand, "I'll ask your parents for your hand in marriage. I know your father won't like me at first, but I'll prove myself. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making you happy." Anita believed every word he said. Months later, Anita noticed changes in her body. She felt tired all the time. Food she once enjoyed suddenly made her sick. At first, she ignored it, hoping it was just stress from school. But deep inside, she already feared the truth. One afternoon, she quietly visited a small private clinic near the university. After the examination, the doctor smiled gently and said, "Congratulations, you're pregnant." Anita felt the room spin around her. Her hands began trembling. She could barely hear the doctor's remaining words. She walked out of the clinic in tears and immediately called Joe. They met later that evening at their usual spot on campus. Anita stood silently before finally whispering, "Joe, I'm pregnant." Joe stared at her without speaking. His smile disappeared. "Are you sure?" Anita slowly nodded as tears rolled down her cheeks. The doctor confirmed it. Joe took a deep breath and held both her hands. "Don't be afraid. We'll face this together." Anita looked into his eyes. "What about my parents?" Joe squeezed her hands gently. "We'll tell them together. They may be angry at first, but eventually they will understand. I won't leave you, Anita. I promise." Those words gave her hope. But the next morning, everything changed. Anita called Joe. His phone was switched off. She tried again. Nothing. She went to his apartment after classes, only to find strangers moving into the building. "The young man who stayed here moved out yesterday," one of the workers told her. "Do you know where he went?" Anita asked desperately. The man shook his head. No idea. She searched everywhere. She asked his classmates. His friends claimed they hadn't heard from him. Days turned into weeks, and Anita completely disappeared from her life, as though he had never existed. Anita cried herself to sleep almost every night, but she kept the pregnancy hidden beneath oversized clothes. She prayed she could somehow finish school before her parents discovered the truth. Unfortunately, secrets never remain hidden forever. One evening during dinner, Mrs. Eve noticed Anita suddenly rush toward the bathroom after smelling the food. Later that night, she quietly entered Anita's room. "Anita," she asked softly, "is that something you're hiding from me?" Anita forced a smile. "No, Mom, I'm just tired." Mrs. Eve wasn't convinced. The following morning, she arranged for the family doctor to visit the house. After a careful examination, the doctor removed his glasses and sighed heavily. "Mr. Adam, your daughter is pregnant." The room fell completely silent. Mr. Adam slowly stood from his chair. His face turned red with anger. "What did you just say?" The doctor lowered his head. "She is several months pregnant." Mr. Adam turned toward Anita with eyes filled with disappointment. "Tell me this is a lie." Anita immediately fell to her knees. Tears streamed down her face. "Daddy, I'm sorry." "Sorry?" he shouted. "You brought shame into this family and all you can say is sorry?" Mrs. Eve stood quietly beside the window, with tears rolling down her cheeks. She didn't say a single word. Anita crawled closer to her father. "Daddy, please forgive me. We were going to get married after graduation, but Joe disappeared. I don't know where he is." Mr. Adam laughed bitterly. "So, after throwing away your future, the man abandoned you?" Anita cried harder. "I never wanted this to happen." Mr. Adam pointed angrily toward the front door. "Enough! From today, you are no longer my daughter." Anita froze. "Daddy, get out!" he roared. She turned to her mother. "Mommy, please say something, please." Mrs. Eve closed her eyes as more tears rolled down her face, but she never looked at Anita. Her silence hurt even more than her father's words. Anita held her mother's legs. "Mommy, please don't let him send me away. I have nowhere to go." Mrs. Eve slowly stepped back without saying a word. Mr. Adam called the security guards. "Take her luggage outside immediately." Within minutes, Anita's suitcases were dumped outside the mansion. The massive iron gate slowly closed before her eyes. She ran toward them, banging desperately. "Daddy, Mommy, please, open the gate. Please forgive me. I'm still your daughter." Nobody answered. She remained outside until nightfall, crying as the house where she had spent her entire life became silent behind those gates. Anita stayed with different friends for a few days, but their kindness slowly faded. Some were afraid their parents would object, others simply grew tired of having an extra person in their homes. Eventually, Anita rented a tiny single room in an old building. The roof leaked whenever it rained, and the room was barely large enough for a small bed and a table. Yet she had no choice. Despite carrying her pregnancy, Anita refused to abandon her education. Every morning, she attended lectures, sat for tests, and prepared for her final examinations. Some students whispered behind her back whenever she walked past, "That's the girl who got pregnant before graduation." Others laughed quietly whenever they saw her swollen stomach, but a few admired her courage. One female classmate sat beside her during an examination and whispered, "Ignore what people are saying. Finish what you started." Anita smiled gratefully. "Thank you." Months later, she graduated successfully. As she held her certificate, she wished her parents were there to celebrate with her, but the seats where they should have been remained empty. Shortly after graduation, Anita gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The first time she held him in her arms, every pain she had endured seemed worth it. She kissed his forehead gently and whispered, "Your name is Henry." The tiny baby wrapped his little fingers around hers. Tears filled Anita's eyes as she smiled through them. "Listen to me, my son. I may not have money anymore. I may not be able to give you everything today, but I promise you this. You will never lack love for as long as I live." As Henry grew into a cheerful little boy, Anita began searching desperately for work. She attended interview after interview, carrying neatly arranged documents and hoping someone would give her a chance. But every interview ended in disappointment. One employer looked at Henry, who was waiting outside the office, and shook his head. "We're looking for someone who can focus entirely on the job." Another sighed. "You have good qualifications, but raising a child will affect your performance." Another simply said, "We need someone more flexible." Each rejection broke her heart a little more. The rent piled up month after month. Some nights, there was barely enough food for both of them. Anita would quietly feed Henry until he was full, then pretend she had already eaten. After putting him to sleep, she would sit beside his small bed with tears running silently down her face. "God," she whispered one night, "I don't mind suffering, but please don't let my son suffer because of my mistakes." Instead of giving up, Anita visited a bank and applied for a small business loan. After several meetings, the bank approved a modest amount. It wasn't much, but it was enough to begin again. She started by selling rice, beans, gari, palm oil, dried pepper, and local spices from a tiny rented shop. Every morning before sunrise, she visited local markets to buy goods. She carried heavy bags herself because she couldn't afford workers. Some customers admired her honesty. If she mistakenly received extra money, she always returned it immediately. "Madam," one elderly customer once said, "people like you are rare." Anita smiled warmly. Honesty doesn't cost anything. Slowly, more customers came. They recommended her shop to friends and family. The little business began growing beyond her expectations. She rented a larger shop, then opened another branch. Soon, supermarkets began buying directly from her. Years later, Anita expanded into exporting Nigerian foodstuffs to other countries. Containers loaded with rice, beans, gari, palm oil, dried fish, crayfish, and traditional spices left the ports carrying her company's name. Her business expanded rapidly. She employed dozens of workers at first, then hundreds. The same woman who had once cried herself to sleep because she couldn't afford a proper meal, gradually became one of the country's biggest exporters of local food products, proving that determination, honesty, and hard work could build a future even after life had completely fallen apart. As Anita's business continued to grow, so did her reputation. Newspapers occasionally featured her story as the woman who had built one of the country's largest food export companies from a tiny shop that sold rice, beans, gari, palm oil, and local spices. Business organizations invited her to speak about entrepreneurship, and young people looked up to her as an example that hard work could change a person's life. But despite her success, Anita never allowed wealth to change who she was. She still greeted everyone with kindness, from the cleaners in her company to the managers in her offices. She never forgot the days when people looked down on her because she was poor. Whenever she saw someone struggling, she quietly offered help without expecting anything in return. Most importantly, she never allowed money to replace her responsibilities as a mother. Although she could easily afford several nannies and housekeepers, Anita chose to raise Henry herself. Every morning, she prepared his breakfast before he left for school. Every evening, no matter how busy she was, she made sure they had dinner together. She attended every school event personally, whether it was a parents' meeting, a debate competition, a sports day, or an award ceremony. Anita was always there, sitting proudly among the other parents with a smile on her face. One afternoon, after Henry won first place in a mathematics competition, he ran into his mother's arms holding the trophy excitedly. "Mom, I won!" Anita hugged him tightly. "I knew you could do it." Henry smiled proudly. "Did you see when they called my name?" Anita laughed. "Of course I did. I was shouting louder than everyone else." Henry looked around playfully. "I heard you." They both laughed together. From a very young age, Henry developed an unusual love for computers. While other children spent hours playing football, Henry could sit in front of a computer for an entire afternoon, trying to understand how software worked. On his 13th birthday, Anita bought him his first laptop. Henry hugged it like it was the greatest gift in the world. "Thank you, Mom." Anita smiled. "Use it wisely." Henry grinned. "I will. One day I'll build something amazing with it." Anita laughed softly. "I believe you." As the years passed, Henry's talent became impossible to ignore. He participated in science fairs, coding competitions, robotics contests, and technology exhibitions. Again and again, he returned home carrying medals and trophies. One evening, he rushed into the living room holding another certificate. "Mom, I came first again!" Anita looked at the certificate and smiled proudly. "I'm not surprised anymore." Henry laughed. "Why?" "Because every time you enter a competition, you come home with another award." Henry scratched his head shyly. "I just enjoy solving problems." Anita looked at him lovingly. "Never lose that passion." His excellent academic performance earned him several scholarships, making his education even easier despite Anita's ability to pay for it all herself. Eventually, Henry gained admission to study software engineering at one of the country's best universities. Anita was overwhelmed with pride as she watched him wear his university gown on his first day. "Your father isn't here to see this," she said quietly. Henry held her hand. "I have you, Mom. That's enough." Anita smiled through tears. "Thank you." University life only sharpened Henry's abilities. While many students focused only on passing examinations, Henry spent countless nights creating software that could solve real-life problems. His lecturers often praised his creativity. During his final year, he developed an innovative mobile application that used artificial intelligence to help businesses automate customer services more effectively than existing platforms. At first, it was simply a university project, but after demonstrating it during a technology conference, everything changed. Investors immediately noticed its enormous potential. Within weeks, technology companies from different countries began contacting him. Meetings followed one after another. Offers continued increasing. One evening, Henry entered Anita's office carrying a folder. His face was filled with excitement. "Mom!" Anita looked up from her documents. "What happened?" Henry placed the folder on her desk. "A global technology company wants to buy my app." Anita smiled proudly. "That's wonderful." Henry laughed nervously. "You haven't seen the amount yet." Anita opened the folder. Her eyes widened as she looked at the figures. She slowly looked back at her son. "Henry, is this real?" He nodded excitedly. "Yes." Anita covered her mouth in disbelief. "My God." A few weeks later, after lawyers finalized every document, the agreement was completed. The sale instantly made Henry one of the youngest multi-millionaires in the country's technology industry. News channels covered the story, newspapers published his photographs, and social media celebrated his achievement. Despite becoming incredibly wealthy overnight, Henry remained exactly the same humble young man his mother had raised. A month later, Henry drove Anita to the outskirts of the city without telling her where they were going. They eventually stopped in front of an enormous mansion overlooking a beautiful lake. Anita looked at the magnificent house in confusion. "Why are we here?" Henry smiled. "Come with me." They walked through the grand entrance as Anita admired the elegant staircase, spacious living rooms, beautiful gardens, and breathtaking views. Finally, Henry handed her a small box. Inside were a set of house keys. Anita looked at him confused. "Whose house is this?" Henry smiled warmly. "Yours." Anita froze. "Mine?" Henry nodded. Tears began filling Anita's eyes. "You bought this for me?" Henry gently held both her hands. "Mom, you sacrificed everything so I could have a future. You carried me when nobody wanted us. You walked until your hands became rough. You gave me everything you never had." Anita's tears rolled freely down her cheeks. Henry smiled through his own tears. "You built my future. Now let me build yours." Anita hugged her son tightly without saying a word for several moments. Finally, she whispered, "I'm proud of the man you've become." Their relationship became even stronger than before. Although Henry had become unbelievably rich, he still called Anita every morning before work and visited her whenever his schedule allowed. They laughed together, prayed together, and discussed every important decision in each other's lives. Not long afterward, Henry met Vera during a business seminar organized by young entrepreneurs. The first time he saw her, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Vera was exceptionally beautiful, with a graceful confidence that naturally attracted attention wherever she went. She was highly educated, elegant in the way she spoke, and carried herself with remarkable sophistication. She possessed the kind of beauty that turned heads without her even trying. But what impressed Henry most wasn't her appearance. It was how intelligent their conversations were. They discussed business, technology, books, and their dreams for the future. Weeks of friendship gradually turned into love. Henry often spoke about her excitedly whenever he visited Anita. "Mom, she's different." Anita smiled. "Every man in love says that." Henry laughed. "No, really. She's kind, intelligent, respectful. She's everything I've ever wanted." Eventually, Henry introduced Vera to Anita. The first meeting went surprisingly well. Vera greeted Anita respectfully. "It's such an honor to finally meet you, ma'am. Henry speaks about you all the time." Anita smiled warmly. "I hope only good things." Vera laughed politely. "Only wonderful things." Throughout the evening, Vera appeared caring and respectful. She helped clear the dining table despite the presence of domestic workers and constantly addressed Anita with respect. Henry watched proudly, convinced he had found the perfect woman. As the months passed, Henry fell more deeply in love with Vera. One evening, during a romantic dinner, he got down on one knee and asked, "Vera, will you marry me?" Vera smiled beautifully before answering, "Yes." Wedding preparations immediately began. Both families celebrated the engagement, and everyone admired how perfect the couple appeared together. Yet, as the weeks passed, Anita couldn't shake a strange feeling deep inside her heart. Vera always seemed perfect whenever Henry was around, but sometimes Anita noticed tiny things that troubled her. There were moments when Vera's smile disappeared the instant Henry looked away. Sometimes Anita caught a cold expression in her eyes that vanished almost immediately. Occasionally, her kindness felt rehearsed, as though she were performing instead of being genuine. One afternoon, after Vera left their home, Anita sat quietly in the living room thinking deeply. She remembered how easily appearances could deceive people. She remembered Joe's promises before abandoning her. She remembered trusting someone completely only to discover his true character too late. That painful memory made her heart heavy. Later that evening, Henry noticed his mother unusually quiet. "Mom, is something bothering you?" Anita hesitated before speaking. "Henry, are you absolutely sure you know Vera well?" Henry looked surprised. "Of course. Why are you asking?" Anita sighed softly. "I don't know. I can't explain it. Something just doesn't feel right." Henry smiled gently. "Mom, I know you're worried because of everything you went through when you were young, but Vera isn't like that." Anita nodded slowly. "I hope you're right." Henry held her hand. "She loves me." Anita forced a small smile, but inside her heart remained unsettled. She wasn't afraid of losing her son's wealth. She was afraid of losing her son to someone who loved his money more than she loved him. Still, Anita refused to judge Vera without proof. She had experienced enough unfair judgment in her own life to know how painful false accusations could be. Instead of confronting Vera or trying to convince Henry with nothing more than her suspicions, Anita quietly made a decision. If Vera truly possessed a good heart, then there would be nothing to fear. But if her kindness was only an act, the truth would eventually reveal itself. She simply needed to find the right way to uncover it. A few days after Henry and Vera fixed a date for their wedding, Anita asked her son to visit her one evening. Henry found his mother sitting quietly on the balcony, staring into the garden. There was something unusually serious about her face. He sat beside her and smiled. "Mom, you sounded worried on the phone. Is everything all right?" Anita remained silent for a few seconds before finally speaking. "Henry, I need you to trust me." Henry looked at her with concern. "I do trust you." Anita sighed softly. "Then let me ask you for something that may sound strange." Henry nodded. "Anything?" Anita looked into his eyes. "I want to work as a maid in your house." Henry blinked in confusion. "A maid?" "Yes." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Anita smiled faintly. "I want to test Vera." Henry immediately shook his head. "No, absolutely not. You're one of the most respected businesswomen in this country. How can I allow my own mother to pretend to be a servant?" Anita reached for his hand. "Listen to me first." Henry remained silent. "Henry, I have lived long enough to know that a person's true character is revealed by how they treat those who can do nothing for them. If Vera truly has a good heart, then this test will only confirm it. If she doesn't, then you deserve to know before you marry her." Henry looked uncomfortable. "Mom, I still think this is unnecessary." Anita smiled gently. "Then what are you afraid of? If she's truly the woman you believe she is, nothing bad will happen." Henry lowered his head. He knew his mother rarely made decisions without thinking carefully. After a long silence, he sighed. "All right." Anita smiled. "Thank you." Henry quickly added, "But only for a few weeks." Anita nodded. "That's all I need." Together, they came up with a simple plan. Anita would disguise herself as an elderly woman looking for temporary domestic work. She dressed in old, faded clothes, wore a simple scarf over her hair, and avoided expensive jewelry or makeup. Only Anita and Henry knew the truth. Everyone else, including Vera, believed she was simply an elderly woman hired to assist around the house until after the wedding preparations. On Anita's first day at the house, Vera welcomed her warmly with a bright smile. "Good morning, Mama." Anita smiled politely. "Good morning, my dear." Vera gently took her around the beautiful house. "This is the living room. The kitchen is over there. The laundry room is downstairs. Let me show you your bedroom." Anita followed quietly as Vera opened a neat little room. "You'll stay here. I hope you'll be comfortable." Anita nodded gratefully. "Thank you very much." Vera smiled sweetly. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Henry stood nearby watching everything with satisfaction. He looked at his mother and smiled as if to say, "See, I told you she was kind." Anita smiled back but said nothing. For the rest of the day, Vera remained polite and respectful. During dinner, she even said, "Mama, you've worked enough today. Please eat and get some rest." Henry couldn't hide his happiness. That evening, after Vera went upstairs, Henry quietly entered Anita's room. "Well?" he asked proudly. Anita smiled slightly. "It's only the first day." Henry laughed. "I think you are beginning to see that you worried for nothing." Anita simply replied, "We will see." The following morning, Henry left early for work. The front door had barely closed before the atmosphere inside the house changed completely. Vera's smile disappeared almost instantly. Her voice became cold. "Old woman." Anita turned around. "Yes, madam." Vera frowned. "Why are you standing there? Didn't you see the dishes in the sink?" Anita nodded. "I'm going now." Vera folded her arms impatiently. "At your age, you should move faster." Anita quietly began washing the dishes without replying. Throughout the day, Vera found fault with almost everything Anita did. If the floor looked clean, Vera deliberately walked through it with dirty shoes and ordered her to mop it again. If the clothes were neatly folded, Vera unfolded them and threw them onto the floor. "Can't you do anything properly?" she snapped. Anita simply apologized and continued working. Every evening, however, everything changed the moment Henry returned from work. Vera immediately became cheerful again. "Mama, you've worked so hard today. Please come and sit down." She even served Anita food herself whenever Henry was watching. Henry smiled proudly every time he witnessed these moments, believing his mother had completely misjudged Vera. But once Henry left each morning, Vera's cruelty returned. Every day her behavior became worse. Sometimes, after Anita finished preparing lunch, Vera would deliberately throw the remaining food into the dustbin instead of allowing Anita to eat. Anita quietly looked at the wasted food one afternoon before asking softly, "Madam, may I at least have a little before you throw it away?" Vera looked at her with disgust. Servants shouldn't be greedy. She emptied the food into the trash and walked away. Anita lowered her eyes and quietly drank water instead to calm her hunger. On another day, after Anita had spent hours cleaning the entire house, Vera inspected every room before saying, "Start all over again." Anita looked surprised. "Madam, I've already cleaned everywhere." Vera smiled coldly. "Did I ask for your opinion? Clean it again." Anita simply picked up the mop and started over without arguing. Sometimes, Vera made cruel comments that revealed what she truly believed. One afternoon, as Anita polished the sitting room furniture, Vera admired herself in the mirror and laughed. "Honestly, poor people should know their place. Some people are simply born to serve others." Anita remained silent. Vera continued proudly. When I become Henry's wife, this house will be mine. I'll live the luxurious life I deserve. She looked directly at Anita. And old servants like you should be grateful I don't replace you with younger ones. Anita quietly continued dusting the shelves without responding. A few days later, Vera looked around the kitchen before saying proudly, "When I marry Henry, old servants like you should be grateful I don't fire you." Anita looked at her calmly. "Kindness costs nothing, my daughter." Vera laughed sarcastically. "Save your advice. Nobody asked for it." Anita silently endured every insult. She never raised her voice. She never argued. She simply observed everything carefully. Then came the morning that changed everything. Vera had instructed Anita to prepare breakfast before 8 o'clock. That morning, one of the gas burners developed a small fault, causing breakfast to be delayed by only a few minutes. Anita hurried as fast as she could before carrying the tray into the dining room. Vera glanced at the wall clock. "You are late." Anita lowered her head. "I'm sorry, madame, the stove." Before she could finish speaking, Vera slapped her hard across the face. The force nearly knocked her off balance. She stumbled backwards, struggling to remain standing. She gently held her burning cheek and whispered softly, "I am sorry." Vera smiled cruelly. "You will learn." Anita quietly picked up the spoon that had fallen onto the floor and continued serving breakfast without saying another word. That evening, Anita finally decided she could no longer remain silent. After dinner, she asked Henry to meet her privately. Henry noticed the faint mark still visible on her cheek. "Mom, what happened?" Anita looked directly at him. "Vera slapped me this morning." Henry stared in disbelief. "What?" Anita slowly told him everything that had been happening since he left for work every day. She explained how Vera insulted her, starved her, forced her to repeat unnecessary work, and treated her with complete cruelty. Henry listened quietly, but struggled to believe what he was hearing. "Mom," he said softly, "that doesn't sound like Vera." Anita sighed sadly. "Because you've never seen the side she hides from you." The following morning, before Vera woke up, Anita quietly placed her mobile phone behind a container on one of the kitchen shelves where it couldn't easily be seen. She started a private live stream directly to Henry's phone. Before leaving for work, Henry received a short message from his mother. "Please, don't call. Just watch." Confused, Henry placed his phone on his office desk while pretending to work. Neither Vera nor anyone else knew they were being watched. Everything remained peaceful until breakfast was delayed by a few minutes because the bread had taken longer than expected to toast. Vera stormed into the kitchen with an angry expression. "You useless woman," she shouted. Anita remained calm. "The breakfast is almost ready." Vera slammed her hand against the kitchen counter. "Almost ready. I told you I wanted it before now." Anita quietly placed the plates on the tray. "I'm sorry." Vera stepped closer. "Sorry? That's all you ever see." Without warning, she slapped Anita across the face again. Hundreds of kilometers away, Henry's eyes widened as he watched everything unfold live on his phone. Anita remained silent, refusing to fight back. Vera became even more furious because she wasn't getting the reaction she wanted. "Lazy old woman, worthless." Anita quietly reached for the breakfast tray. "I'll serve it now." Vera shoved her violently with both hands. Anita lost her balance completely. Her body crashed backwards and her head struck the hard-tiled floor with a sickening sound. The tray scattered across the kitchen. For a brief moment, everything became silent. In his office, Henry shot to his feet in horror. "Mom!" he shouted as he grabbed his car keys and ran out of the building, leaving everyone around him staring in confusion. His assistant ran after him. "Sir, the board meeting is about to begin." Henry didn't even turn around. "Cancel everything," he shouted before disappearing into the elevator. Outside, he jumped into his car and drove faster than he ever had in his life. His mind replayed the video over and over again. Every slap, every insult, every cruel word his mother had endured in silence. Tears blurred his vision as he gripped the steering wheel. "Please don't die, Mom," he whispered repeatedly. "Please, not because of me." 20 minutes later, his car screeched to a stop in front of the house. He ran inside without closing the car door. As he entered the kitchen, his heart shattered. Anita was still lying unconscious on the floor, exactly where she had fallen. Blood stained her hair and part of the tiles beneath her. Vera stood nearby, shaking with fear. "Henry, I can explain." Henry didn't even look at her. He immediately knelt beside his mother. Mom. He gently lifted her head onto his lap. "Please open your eyes." There was no response. Henry quickly picked her up in his arms and carried her toward the car. As he reached the door, Vera grabbed his arm. "Henry, please listen to me." Henry slowly turned and looked at her. For the first time since they met, there was no love in his eyes, only disappointment. He pulled his arm away without saying a word and drove straight to the hospital. Doctors and nurses rushed Anita into the emergency room the moment they arrived. Henry remained outside, pacing the corridor. Every passing second felt like an hour. He buried his face in his hands. "God," he whispered, "please don't take my mother away from me. She has already suffered enough." Nearly 2 hours later, a doctor finally walked out. Henry immediately stood up. "Doctor." The doctor removed his face mask and smiled gently. "She's stable now. The head injury was serious, but thankfully there was no permanent damage. She'll need time to recover, but she's going to be all right." Henry closed his eyes in relief. "Thank you." When he entered Anita's hospital room, she was still asleep. A bandage covered part of her forehead. Henry quietly sat beside her bed and held her hand. Looking at the bruises on her face broke something inside him. Tears slowly rolled down his cheeks. For the first time since he was a little boy, Henry cried without trying to hide it. "I'm sorry, Mom. You tried to warn me and I refused to believe you. I failed you." He lowered his head onto the edge of the hospital bed and cried until Anita slowly opened her eyes several hours later. She weakly squeezed his hand. Henry immediately looked up. "Mom." Anita smiled faintly, despite the pain. "You're crying?" Henry laughed through his tears. "Don't ever scare me like that again." Anita gently touched his face. "I'm still here." Henry lowered his head in shame. "I'm sorry." Anita smiled softly. "It's all right." "No," Henry replied. "It isn't. I chose to believe someone else over the woman who gave me everything." Anita shook her head gently. "Sometimes love makes people blind." Meanwhile, the hospital had already informed the police about the assault. Officers visited the house and collected Anita's phone, which still contained the complete live stream recording. The evidence showed everything exactly as it had happened. There was no editing, no missing parts. Every insult, every slap, every act of cruelty, every lie Vera had told was destroyed within a few minutes of watching the video. A few days later, after Anita had been discharged from the hospital, Vera came to Henry's office, hoping to save their relationship. She entered quietly, with tears already running down her face. "Henry, please forgive me." Henry remained seated behind his desk without speaking. Vera continued crying. "I made a mistake. I lost my temper. I never meant to hurt her that badly." Henry looked at her calmly. "A mistake?" Vera nodded desperately. "Yes, please believe me." Henry slowly stood up and walked toward her. "A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday." His voice remained calm but firm. "A mistake is saying something you immediately regret." He looked directly into her eyes. "What you did wasn't a mistake. It was your true character." Vera fell to her knees. "Please don't leave me." Henry quietly reached for her left hand and gently removed the engagement ring he had once placed there with so much love. He looked at it for a brief moment before closing her fingers around it again. Then he simply said, "It's over." Vera broke down completely. "Henry, please!" Henry pressed the intercom on his desk. "Security." Within seconds, 2 security officers entered the office. Henry looked away. "Please escort Miss Vera out." Vera cried as the officers gently led her toward the door. She looked back several times, hoping Henry would stop them. He never did. As news of the incident quietly spread among their social circle, Vera's carefully built reputation collapsed. Many people who once admired her no longer wanted anything to do with her. Friends who attended expensive parties with her suddenly stopped answering her calls. Invitations disappeared. The wealthy lifestyle she had dreamed of vanished with the relationship she had destroyed through her own cruelty. She finally learnt a painful lesson that no amount of beauty could replace a good heart. Beauty could attract attention, but character was what kept love alive. Months gradually passed. Anita recovered completely from her injuries, although the small scar near her hairline remained as a reminder of everything that had happened. Henry became even more protective of his mother. He called her several times every day. Whenever she traveled for business, he insisted on knowing where she was staying. If she returned home late, he waited until she called to confirm she had arrived safely.
One evening, as they shared tea on the balcony, Henry looked at his mother quietly. "Mom?" Anita smiled. "Yes?" Henry lowered his eyes. "I still haven't forgiven myself." Anita sighed softly. "Henry, I should have believed you from the beginning." Anita reached across the table and held his hand. "My son, everyone makes mistakes." Henry shook his head. "Not like this." Anita smiled gently. "Listen to me carefully." Henry looked at her. "Trust is important, but trust should always be guided by wisdom, not blind emotion. Love should never stop you from seeing the truth." Henry nodded slowly. "I'll never forget that." Anita smiled. "Then you've already learned the lesson."